because he blocks the PowerPoint.
Yeah, and they're not going to use PowerPoint that much. It's going to be more for general discussion. So it's
Okay. Because like their images though are like.
yeah.
Okay. Upstairs to get the food.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Can you all hear me? Can you all hear me? Okay. Welcome to our Spring Business Analytics Symposium, part of our Distinguished Speaker Series here at Stillman School of Business. This afternoon is a result of an amazing collaboration between the Stillman School of Business and the Department of Military Science. Thank you, Lieutenant Colonel Adam Scher. I am Renu Ramnarayan. I'm a faculty member in the Computing and Decision Sciences Department at the Stillman School of Business, where our business analytics and supply chain programs are housed. I'm also the co-director of the Master of Science in Business Analytics program. This evening, we're delighted to welcome 3 wonderful panel members who are here in person, and 1 wonderful panel member joining us remotely from Poland. You see his picture there. Mr. Jermon Bafaty, is the founder and CEO of the digital and IT professional services firm, Platinum Technologies. Jermon is on the front lines of America's defense industrial base and an entrepreneur in supply chains and national security technologies. He has worked in government at the Department of Energy on AI and with the Pentagon officials on procurement, weapons design, cybersecurity, and other mobilization issues. In his current role, Bafaty is strategizing to diversify America's access and supply of rare earth metals, semiconductors, and other advanced machine learning technologies. Captain Venkatesh Anuj Srinivasan is a military government officer with the 353rd Civil Affairs Command in Staten Island, New York. Before that, Captain Srinivasan was at the Army's 75th Innovation Command in Houston, Texas, supporting the autonomy and robotics team. In his civilian career, he's a research and development program manager with the US Navy. His area of expertise is in big data, predictive data analytics, cloud computing, AI, machine learning, unmanned systems, acoustic data processing, and data encryption. Anuj has an MS in electrical engineering from the University of North Texas, Denton, Texas, and a BS in electronics and communication engineering from the Anna University in India. Dr. Brandon Smith has had a distinguished career spanning over 2 decades across defense and intelligence in the Army and Special Operations, private business, and software sectors, consistently driving outcomes of national security and business significance. Presently, Brandon serves as a guiding force behind advanced technology solutions design at FNA, delivering impactful results to both commercial entities and national security clients on a global scale. Brandon has a Doctor of Business Administration from Drexel University's esteemed Labow School of Business. Brandon also holds a graduate and undergraduate degrees in intelligence studies, specializing in cyber intelligence and terrorism from the University of South Florida and American Military University, respectively. Major Alexander Boroff, joining us from Poland, is an active duty Army major, serving as a Battalion Operations Officer for the 2nd Battalion, 69th Armor Regiment, serving as the framework nation for Forward Land Forces, Battle Group Poland. As an armor officer, Boroff has commanded company formations in both the generating and operational force. He has completed tours on the 3rd Infantry Division staff, the Joint Staff, and the Army staff. While on the Army staff, Boroff worked on improving Army cyber policy. He commissioned through the United States Military Academy and holds a master's in systems engineering from Johns Hopkins University and a master's in policy management from Georgetown University. His publications include topics such as general organizational leadership in public and private sectors. He's a former fellow at the Modern War Institute at West Point. Now, both in modern battlefield and internal operations, data analysis and technology are critical to adequately support a wide variety of military activities. As the volume of data generated in the digital age continues to grow, so will the role and importance of big data analytics in modern warfare, with applications spanning intelligence gathering, predictive maintenance, and strategic decision-making, to name a few. Technologies like AI and IoT are necessary to ensure safety and success. So this afternoon, our panel will discuss the role of data analytics and technology in modern warfare. Lieutenant Colonel Adam Scher, Professor of Military Science and Director of the ROTC program, will be moderating the discussion. But before I hand it over to Adam, just a few housekeeping items. This presentation is being recorded and live streamed via YouTube. After the presentation, there will be a Q&A session. For the in-person audience, please wait for someone to bring the mic to you. That way we can hear you in the auditorium, and the remote audience can also hear you. For the remote audience, your mics are muted. We welcome your questions and comments. Please drop them in chat, and we'll make sure we address as many of them as possible. With that said, let's give our panel members a warm Seton Hall Pirates welcome. Adam, all yours.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, to our audience on our live stream as well. Thank you very much for being here. It is important to note that what we will discuss here today does not represent the Department of Defense, the United States military, or the federal government. We are excited to exchange those ideas and talk about it, but as we talk about this in our personal capacity, please recognize that it does not reflect any official stance of the DoD. When we think all the way back to military science and how we add rigor to the program, this partnership and collaboration with the Stillman School is part and parcel of doing that. So special thanks to Renu for helping organize this, for reaching out to us, partnering, and all of the senior leadership and faculty and staff of the Stillman School of Business that sees a place for us to share some of the practical applications that each of our students are studying in the classroom. And as I like to talk to my cadets about, and we think through the role that Karl von Clausewitz has played in our thinking, we are reminded of the fog of war and how challenging it is to understand yourself, to know what the enemy is doing, or to have an appreciation for what's happening on the battlefield. And through growing technology and emerging data analytics, we're helping soldiers on the front lines lift some of that fog of war and hopefully be able to sift through the noise to make better decisions through technological applications on the battlefield. And our ROTC students have the opportunity through this type of collaboration to gain a better appreciation and understanding for how many of their colleagues are studying, thinking about, and designing the technological solutions to these problems. To our Stillman students, this is a great opportunity for you to realize that some of the biggest challenges in the academic coursework you endeavor are being asked, and we need your help in the Department of Defense. There are practical applications to your studies in the areas of national security. And finally, I think it's just truly important at a time that our Public discourse continues to talk about the things that separate us, that we demonstrate positive civ-mil relations, and put our students that will serve in the military and our students that will serve in industry, in government, together, because the challenges that each of you, next generation of leaders, will face will require your teamwork and collaboration. With that, I'd like to begin with Anuj and ask him to really help us frame what data analytics means to the Department of Defense and how the military is using data analytics to adapt to the modern battlefield. Anuj.
Thank you, sir. It is a great opportunity and great honor to be here. I used to be a student like you all, ROTC students, before I became commissioned, and I serve in the Army now. And there's a lot of, I have the connection that you make in your Army side and how you make that into your civilian side. It really feeds into a lot of the work that I do today, because I'm a program manager. I design new technologies, and then I put my soldier hat and I think about, okay, how my technology would work. To answer your question, sir, we live in an information age. We all know this. We have a lot of data coming in from different systems and different activities, different manned systems, unmanned systems, and the most important thing at this point is, how do you parse through that data? How do you understand? How do you make sense? How do you decide what to do from that information and then act? But the action part needs to be swift, because especially in the military environment where the decision to act and then actually acting can be a life and death situation, right? So that's why predictive analytics plays a huge role. As an electrical engineer in the civilian side, I'll kind of give you guys a little bit of an example of an unmanned undersea vehicle that I used to work on for years. 3 years actually. The biggest problem was we were collecting terabytes of data. Each sortie the drone would go out, it will come back with terabytes of undersea acoustic data. And then it will take hours to offload that data. Then you take the hours of data that you offload is a raw data, and now you have to process that, and it's going to take a few more days to process that to make the decision on what you saw underwater, right? So it is very, very important, especially when we have multi-domain systems that are in land, sea, air, and cyber. How are they communicating efficiently? And it's a very important topic, especially last year within the DoD. In the last couple years, we have, the Department of Defense has put out a lot of different strategies on how are we managing the data? What are we gonna do with the joint all-domain command and control? What are we gonna do with AI? How are we actually using artificial intelligence and machine learning in an ethical way, at the same time are making use of the technology to make our decisions quickly in a very dynamic environment where escalation can happen very quickly, because it has really the modern warfare, modern environment is very, very complex, which can cause escalation very quickly. So how do you make sure that your decisions aren't causing issues, are not making you act that could cause an issue that you wouldn't want? So it is really, really important for us to understand and make sure that the data we are collecting are properly processed in time to actually removing the barriers we're trying to solve. So another example I'll kind of talk through about is, especially in the predictive analytics, when we talk about, okay, we want to use AI. Okay, so how do I use AI? So you train algorithms, right? You use quality training data to actually train something to do something for you. For example, if I want my drone, aerial drone or undersea drone, for it to go from A to B on its own. So you're using autonomy algorithm so it can actually go from A to B. But you're doing that in a US environment, or in an environment you are familiar with. So that can also cause a bias in your training data, which could also feed into your artificial intelligence algorithm itself, could be a biased system, right? So especially when we are developing these different technologies, we want to use it in our adversary environments. And how do we make sure that this works, even though we trained it here? So there are lots of those challenges with respect to this that we are looking into, making sure what the training data we're using are replicative of the environment we want the system to deploy. I hope that answers your question, sir. And I think it is a very, very important area. Lots of data scientists, we need you. There's a lot of synergy in this area. In big data management, and also, the cloud, using cloud computing to solve our problems, and it's a very, very dynamic environment. So, and making decision quickly is where we have our edge, and I think the DoD is doing a lot of different aspects of development in this area, but it is very, very important for us to kind of execute these different challenges efficiently with that.
Thank you very much. Jermon, how do you see the defense industry addressing these areas of concern for the military through AI, data analytics, autonomous vehicles, other types of machine learning? What role does the defense industrial base play in helping the military solve these problems?
Thanks for the question, Adam, and I'm glad to be here with everyone. Anuj talked about a specific component about processing the data. And what that means in real world terms, from our perspective as supporters of the military community with technology, is how do we get to process that data for you faster so you can make a decision? And oversimplifying something for you, you hear or may have not heard about something like hypersonic missiles that travel at the speed of Mach 5, which is around 3,000 miles an hour. So if you think from California to right here at Seton Hall, that's an hour that it would take from launch to strike in terms of a missile. What are the tools, sensors, the types of technologies that we can build to process that data at speed, so our commanding officers that have to make a decision on what to do next, that they can act? Gone are the times when you can wait 12, 15, 18 a day in terms of hours to be able to say, okay, this is what we think our response needs to be. And normally you would have the ability to throw more analysts at the problem, and even then you're going to get some level of confidence rate based on the amount of information they can process as a human being and then give advice. Now with the advent of high performance computing, cloud computing, and being able to process those hours of data, sometimes in place once that data is retrieved, our job is to provide those types of solutions, sensors, analytical detail to allow you as a decision maker to say, okay, well, what next and what do we want to do with that? So big part of our responsibility there, and just providing the technical expertise that will help enable the force, because the military is built to fight, to defend, to be ready to protect, not necessarily to be the data analysts and engineers that are getting this information.
Thank you. Brandon, how do you use complexity models and threat analysis to help us better understand the battlefield that we're on and provide the correct requirements to the defense industry for how we want to use this new technology?
Sure, thanks. So like everybody else, I'm really happy to be here. Thanks for having us. A couple things I want to address like that have come up, and to make this a bit interactive, like, sir, have you, especially for the cadets in the room, have you addressed the 10% rule yet? Is that still a saying in the Army? You know, so there's a saying in the Army, and mostly it's supposed to apply to something like your issued weapon or something like that, but the saying in the Army is that you need to adhere to the 10% rule, which is at any given time you need to be 10% smarter than your equipment. And otherwise things can go very poorly wrong, right? So where does that translate down to the role of data analytics and the role of AI, you know, machine learning, these types of technologies that we're bringing to bear? Well, the problem is that they're very smart. And it's increasingly harder if you take a look at these models, algorithms, and the decisions that they're trying to prompt. They're very complex and they're very difficult things, and it's increasingly harder to be 10% smarter than these ideas, right? And you're dealing with a force that's also trying to get behind the amount of education that's required to leverage this information appropriately. And it starts all the way back, as both of these gentlemen have said, with a data problem. In school especially, and then out in business a little less so. When we're designing these technologies, we're used to having kind of our ability to dictate the data, whether it's the training data set that we talked about or something like that. But on the part of the military industrial base that we respond to, we're also concerned with the enemy. So we don't get to dictate who's doing what to even collect in the first place. If we're looking underwater for different types of acoustic signatures, it's up to the adversary on if they're operating that day and what gets collected, right? They get a vote in all of this. So the first thing is you end up with data that is both incomplete, it's from multiple sources of varying reliability over inconsistent time frames, right? So it's very hard to come up with, let's say, just a training data set for that. And the problems kind of grow from there. So the very first thing you end up with is a biased data set where we have data about our adversaries. Why do we have that data about our adversaries? Well, because we asked for it in a collection environment. So we have this self-licking ice cream cone, as we call it, where then when somebody goes and polls data on that topic, what do they see? Well, they see the thing that we put in the system. So it makes you feel as though potentially at our company, we think of things in networks. So there are entities or nodes that are more important than your data suggests. You're missing information about things that weren't the emphasis of the collection requirement in the first place. And those things that were the emphasis of the collection requirement might be more important than they are in reality to a given threat system or to a given situation. So just right there, before you've done anything, before we've tried to drive a decision, the amount of data we're collecting, it needs a scientific approach on just to decide where do we go next to collect more data, and is the data actually representative of reality in the world, or is it a giant bias loop? And just right there, we can start to apply AI and machine learning. We apply a version of graph neural networks that allow us to say, these entities discovered in the system are anomalous. They should be more important than your data suggests. That your data set is biased against these particular data points being as important as we think it should be, right? So that should generate a good collection requirement with less bias to go find more information about, let's say, an adversarial network. But the problem is just getting to that point and having somebody train a network to get there requires a whole different skill set than the users who would consume that product and actually try to make a decision based on it. So again, you kind of have to go back to that 10% rule. How is it, so for the business school here, what are you designing that may go into the defense industrial base? And how does the user actually engage with this thing in a meaningful manner, right? And there's a fairly large gap there. And then for the cadets in the room, you know, again, this is a piece of equipment that, if just like anything else, if not understood and isn't well maintained, right? The models aren't retrained. We don't look for the biases. We don't do the things that we would do in the same way you'd maintain a vehicle. You got to maintain these things. If you don't do those things, then you're going to end up utilizing something incorrectly. And in best case, you're going to wonder why you're not achieving the effects you want to achieve. And in worst case, somebody gets hurt, needlessly. So that's kind of where that goes. And it affects, what I'll say here just to cap it off, is it affects everything from planning the information you want to collect, all the way through executing based on that information, whether it's doing something against your adversary or doing something for more information collection or somewhere in between. All the way through the targeting process, whether that be kind of the war on terror style targeting we've been used to, or now what we're seeing in, vis-a-vis Russia-Ukraine, a more traditional force-on-force problem set. And all of these things require different data with different collection, where the models and the technologies we're going to apply to it need to be mission-focused. It's not going to do you any good to apply a model for the last war on the current war, so you're not going to achieve the effects you want to achieve. So with that, I'll stop there. That's kind of like where I would say the role of data analytics and how it would impact what threat you're going to choose to prosecute, as well as is it going to achieve the effect you want it to achieve. It's all dictated by this kind of same problem that I hope we can continue to discuss on the panel.
Thank you. Alex, as we turn to you from Poland, can you share with us how you and your team are using this technology on the front lines to defend NATO, to support partners in Ukraine, and perhaps address some of the expectations that you have for these future second lieutenants that arrive to your formation?
I appreciate the question, sir, and I'll try and get after that to the best of my ability. I'm not going to be as eloquent or as knowledgeable as the rest of the distinguished members of this panel, but I would say that I'm certainly the end user of all the technology that they're discussing, and or should I say the eventual end user, because perhaps it has not gotten to me yet. But so where I am right now is a place called Battalion in Poland. It's in the northeast part of Poland, and it's in what we call the blunt layer defense for an adversarial aggression westward. So this is a euphemism, a very Army euphemism for hold at all costs, integrate with the Polish, defend forward. So what we have here, as far as AI for perhaps threat analysis or what we're discussing in this forum here, the cutting edge of what we have usually looks like a couple of intelligence analysts with a map, with an overlay, that they're drawing their best guess based on what we think the enemy might do. And obviously, so as Anuj said, that process that we have right now takes too long. As Jermon said, there's too much data that is out there that cannot be filtered properly for us to even make a decision if we were to have perfect information of all the data that was available to us about potential threat actions. And finally, as Brandon was saying, perhaps it's not even the right data set as what we have because we don't know exactly what the adversary could potentially bring to bear against us. So the DoD and Army, I know acquisition communities are filtering down things to come to us at some point. We had a demonstration today of a tool that you could use to kind of map enemy actions and move them towards us, reducing our planning cycle, making us a little bit more agile and adaptive when it comes to fighting against a potential foe. But that is not quite where we're at yet here. One thing that we have been testing is the prognostic and predictive maintenance tool. This essentially gives us our maintenance vehicles. It's attached to all of them, and it shows them where their faults will come up, builds a model, and helps us secure our supply chain for in somewhat of a predictive manner. But I do look forward to a time where we're able to leverage some of this technology to deter adversaries and assure our allies. I hope that got after some of our questions, but I'm not certain I answered the mail. Over.
No, thanks, Alex. It's really incredible for you to give us a frontline view of how this technology gets used by our warfighters. I'd like to really just sort of open it up to the panel to kind of address anything that has been said, but really maybe, Brandon, we'll ask you to start by putting your red hat on. How are our adversaries using emerging technology to try to put our military at risk and threaten our national security?
Yeah, thanks. Great question. I think we can prompt like a pretty robust discussion here. In some ways, the technology that's being used against us is extremely obvious in that it's not a piece of quote-unquote military tech. You know, if you're looking at, not necessarily, it's not always going to be necessarily a hypersonic missile that is the issue, right? You know, so everything from what we call in the government UTS, or ubiquitous technological surveillance, these things. You know, some of the information to include, I mean, at the completely commercial and classified level, you know, your carrier is selling data about you and your use of this that lets us know at a given time, in some cases, in some countries, you know, are you using the phone or is the phone in your pocket? The accelerometer is talking to everything around you. Now, so now let's say you're from the type of military intelligence activities that I used to support, right? And you're somebody who's supposed to say they're one thing but behaves as another and goes to a foreign city to have a meeting. You know, how do you actually walk around? How do you control that data signature? Everything is collecting on you everywhere all the time. So you need to know exactly how to conform to the signature in your data about what it takes to walk through a Huawei smart city and essentially not get compromised by your device. And not having a device is a signature unto itself, right? So, so not having a device on you that doesn't report isn't good enough. And why does this device only work when Brandon leaves Tampa and comes to New Jersey? So where did it go, right? Like why does one device turn off and another device turns on? These are all types of data questions and problems in machine learning where this is how the adversary is using it against us. You know, how much Huawei technology is in the US phone grid, for instance, and what does it do? How much technology are in DJI drones that are kind of a problem? So there's an entire discipline of counterproliferation in supply chains. We talk about wanting to secure supply lines and supply chains, but there's also, you know, I'm sure you could speak better to this, this idea of, you know, the adversary is actually penetrating the defenses through second and third party ownerships of companies that bring technology that is actually vital to security and vital to just everyday communications into the supply chain in kind of a surreptitious or obfuscated manner, right? So, I mean, we could talk hypersonics for sure, and those still exist. But like, I honestly think, or something along those lines, right? We could talk about autonomous threats that have taken. We were just talking about shipping in the Black Sea disruptions, but at the same time, you know, the same amount of potential damage can be done by where chips come from and what they get installed on and how they report on you literally everywhere you go. So, I mean, maybe I can leave it more as a prompt like that than.
I can top a little bit on the data vulnerability side. So I'm sure everybody's aware of the cloud computing, right? And how Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Azure, Google, all these different folks are in this space. And they say one thing, it is a shared security model. It's like you have a house, you lock the door, you have the key. You lost the key, but you're the one who are locking the door. So to one of the real-time example to that I can give you in how it is affecting our military as a way, is if the security of those networks are not efficiently managed, the adversaries are trying to attack through breach into our outside perimeter network every single day. Right now, as we're speaking, they're attacking us. So one of the examples which was in the news a few years ago, I think a couple years ago, was, you know, somebody did not set the incoming traffic on one of the cloud providers, which literally held all of their emails, okay, a specific branch. And then what happened was the data was stolen. So these are all the different types of vulnerabilities that needs to be looked at within our, you know, network infrastructure that may lead to the information that we want to protect that might be given that our adversaries might take. So like that's why it's like really important about, you know, the security, multi-level security, that is something the DoD is talking about these days, and how do we put that in our network, along with eventually moving towards zero trust architecture, which means you're checking as if every single network is a threat. So those are all the kind of the strategies we should be taking towards protecting our vulnerabilities in the data side. And one last thing too, like as you mentioned about how they are using our phones. So I'm sure Alex can speak to it more eloquently about it, how the Ukrainians and the Russians were using the soldiers' activities on their phones to find where they were. Even generals were attacked because of that. So our cadets and the new soldiers and officers that are joining our ranks, how are we making sure that our day-to-day attraction and how we're connected to these Internet of Things, how are we making sure that we are safeguarding our privacy, which may, especially in an army, in the military environment, could lead to very adverse actions. So that's kind of where I'll say is, we have these vulnerabilities should be kind of taken seriously as we move towards our next, as we prepare ourselves.
Yeah, it's interesting hearing these 2 points because talk about zero trust, security, shared security models, and I always go back to this saying that a friend of mine told me a long time ago, which is the only time something's a secret is when one person knows the story, right? And then the other component is this idea that, in the last 70 years, in terms of from like kind of World War II forward, there was a point where the United States really did have a monopoly on technology. That's no longer the case, right? It's extremely commercialized, ubiquitous. You can get almost anything you want on your phone or order it from your phone, right? And that's a new concept when it comes to how do you protect our assets from a supply chain standpoint, and how do you protect the nation in terms of how you actually go to war. I think there's some goodness here, though, when you think about supply chain. What matters in the military is provenance. So where did the material come from, right? And I use that from a perspective of, if you think about like Iran drones, well, we know that, okay, Iran did it, but where did the material from the drones come from? Can we sanction companies or other organizations to prevent them from building more of those as quickly? And try to at least keep us under the guise of getting into another war, but preventing that. So there is provenance in terms of how did that information come about, or where did it come from, and even going through the supply chain on I'll call it the offensive side, to make sure the things that we are purchasing, the materials that we are purchasing, whether they be technology, software, or real hardware related things for platforms, that technology that's going into the products that are supposed to keep us safe, that are delivered to the battlefield, are going to work the way that we expect them to work. And there is a big focus that we've seen from the perspective of the Department of Defense where that is mattering more. You mentioned some of these companies, DJI and others, where we don't know what their technology is doing. And there is you'll hear commercial companies that have worldwide presences push back on this idea that we, as buyers of their technology, need to be able to certify at each step of the way where that material came from. But it really is a matter of national security. Because that technology, again, is so ubiquitous, and the fact that anyone can get their hands on it, being able to put this into military architecture, whether it be from a software or hardware standpoint, it's critically important that this is going to work the way we want it to work when we need it to work. So I'll just share that from a supply chain standpoint in terms of how we, from an industry, are looking at supporting, really again, from the perspective of provenance, be able to help our clients understand where this technology came from, or as importantly, being able to certify that things that we build for our clients are going to operate the way they need to, especially when we need to.
Jermon, can I just pull on one thread? You mentioned that there was an era really in the post-World War II time frame that the United States had a monopoly on technology. In this 21st century, it's not only that the United States doesn't have a monopoly on the technology, but government no longer has a monopoly on the technology. So much of what Russia was doing on Ukraine's border at the end of 21 and 2022 was available through commercial satellite data. So there was a time that government, military, sort of had some control and the lead effort in designing research development. How do you see the modern battlefield changing because so many people have access to all the data on the battlefield? We can watch on YouTube and Telegram the impacts of FPV drones or other types of strikes on our devices in 30 to 60-second clips that used to only be saved for the nightly news when the government would release it.
If you think about just space in general, there's been this democratization of space over the last 15 or so years. And primarily because it was very expensive to put something up, into the atmosphere and into space. And now when we look at who are going to be the, I would say, commercial players that are going to support this need from the military standpoint, it is going to get, in my opinion, back to be more bespoke. The technology itself is still going to be needed to be customized to the needs of the United States government. And as a result, there are going to be costs associated with it. But I believe that, making that decision is going to be a conscious choice for a smaller group of industrial suppliers that are going to be able to meet that mission, just because similar needs are going to be, they're also worldwide needs. So there's always going to be this thing where a company says, do I take 70% of my technical roadmap and devote to the Department of Defense, right? When there is a 10x market that I don't have to do that for, right? And, depending on what your board of directors or your shareholders demand of you, that may force the hand of the organization. But, the promise that I see is that there is more interest in national defense, and I'm seeing more organizations deciding to get into that space. What they're finding out is that those requirements that they may see as rigid, they're also necessary. That's to me the positive outlook on there, that there are organizations out there that are willing to support and willing to make that conscious investment to be able to support the needs of those end users.
Alex, can I bring you in on the previous question? How are you protecting yourself and your team from Russian surveillance out there in Poland? How are you protecting your data, your communications? You're talking to us right now on an unclassified net, and the Kremlin's listening to this conversation.
Yes, sir. So I actually wanted to briefly touch on what he was saying earlier, though. Just do this last, I'll answer the question here in a moment. But what I think the Army and DoD is finding, at least from the Army staff perspective, so I'll take my battalion level operations officer hat on and put back on my Army staff hat, is that our policy at the DoD and Army level reacts too slowly to the way the technology is changing. So we are still we're having a conversation about what these technologies could possibly do for our Army, and it's a problem set that we're still defining. So we don't have the finite solution, which the Army under its normal acquisition processes would require to develop some solution, technological solution for the problems that it's facing. So these normal procedures are not working, and I think that's what we're finding is that we cannot acquire the technological systems that we're looking for because the way that we are set in acquiring processes, spanning a program over 10 years or whatever we're going to do with it, just doesn't really pan out like that. But for encryption, for communications, a couple things that we're doing here. So for our command post setups, so these are facilities that we're using to control our entire operations. We're looking at a couple different solutions. Number one that we're seeing a little bit of in Ukraine is that we're hiding in plain sight. And what does that mean? So that means we are taking we're using something to the effect of Starlink or Star Shield to camouflage our electromagnetic signature, which is gigantic in a normal formation. The problem with Army systems is that they all assume that there's no baseline for any technology in any area that they're moving into. So you go into an area, you have to set up all the communications. There's no infrastructure, there's no cell network, there's nothing. Now you're Starlink. So you can go, you don't need this massive satellite dish to get 8 megabits of downlink to come to run your battalion top. What you can do is take over a small building, put the Starlink in there, and now you're just blended into the background noise of the electromagnetic spectrum, so you're not broadcasting your position out to the entire planet. Some normal things we do are, we encrypt our radio communications at the tactical level, but that's not, I don't think, exactly what you're looking for. Realistically, we're really still, as an Army, really experimenting with what that design looks like and how to not stand out in specifically that spectrum, and then also with our physical footprint as well. That's what I got there, sir.
Great. This will be my last question to the panel, and then we will turn it over to the audience. How do you see our policymakers, our military leaders, and our entrepreneurs in industry coming together to better secure our data and deploy out to Alex and his team the types of technological tools that will make them safe on the battlefield?
So I think I'm very optimistic, but cautiously optimistic as we are creating, as lots of points that Alex just mentioned about acquisition, about the using Starlink, and about all these different commercial available systems to be able to quickly communicate, and agility is something that he talked about. And I think that's where it's all about. How quickly are we creating our contract vehicles? As program managers, we are able to, we saw a technology, we execute, we put some dollars in it, tested it, and how quickly can we operationalize a technology, an R&D technology to folks like Alex and soldiers and sailors and airmen quickly enough. So that's kind of where it's at, and that comes with our industry partners working together. That comes with our policymakers providing us resources and making sure that the dollars we're spending, the taxpayer dollars, are efficiently managed. And one of the things, I think I had a slide, but it's okay. Well, there is a term in the innovation world, a DoD innovation struggle. It's called the DoD valleys of death. There is the lab environment where I used to be, and then there is the prototype. It goes, I think it's the couple slides after, few slides after. So there you go. So these are all the different valleys where a technology fails. So I think these are all the choke points that we need to hit to make sure this technology that we're working on gets to Alex and others quickly. Because the struggle happens from an idea in the lab to making a prototype, from an idea to a prototype, from prototype to actually making something that can work. Then we have an amazing world-famous drone, but there's only one. But we need hundreds of them. But then the problem comes to scaling, and then the project dies out there. And one of the other things that also happening because of our adversaries are stealing our intellectual property, right? So these technologies that we have invested in these different areas in this phase are being stolen, and they're actually making it happen. So that's where I think it's a shared effort, and I think we have to provide the agility, as everybody in the panel talked about. How do we quickly transition a technology? How do we make the requirements for the technology efficient enough that it meets the needs of the warfighters and efficiently actually executing it? So I'll let Jermon talk to that next, answer some of this.
Yeah, so I think we're in an interesting time right now where, historically, we're not the first mover when I think about government. There's always been a strong research and development focus, but when technology takes off and it is out there from a commercial standpoint, government doesn't usually move as fast. And this is one of the few times in history where I feel like the government's all in when it comes to technology, and specifically these forward-leading technologies around artificial intelligence especially, and really figuring out how we can harness that for the protection of energy. And, political discourse aside, I do think that, from a congressional standpoint, really setting the architecture for what the responsible use of these technologies should be a primary responsibility that gets moved on quickly. And I think the other piece is, referencing the valley of death when it comes to technology insertion into the military is adapting that fail-fast mentality. There's a General Minahan out at Air Mobility Command on Monday last week or Tuesday, whichever day it was that I was there out at Scott Air Force Base. He said something I thought that was just really important. He said under his leadership, he always instructs his team when he's working with the contract community that the answer is either yes, no, or not right now. And being able to get in that mode where we know if we have something of value that you can use today and being able to act on it, I think that is a strong way to approach the relationship that at least lets us know as industry if we are providing you the right thing for what you need today.
And Jermon, if I may, I know you actually in 2019 helped the Department of Energy. So it's not just DoD, it's whole of government. Yeah. You pioneered Department of Energy's AI office.
Yeah, that was an interesting time. I learned how government works, and I learned about the aspiration of what good policy making could look like. But collectively, we were able to get something done. Credit to the executive and really the legislative branch to be able to make that a reality, because at the end of the day, it's our money in terms of taxpayer money. So if you decide that you want to expand government, you might look at it as, oh, I'm creating an office to make things better, but you're expanding government and you're taking money away from taxpayers. You got to have a real strong story to justify that to your congressional appropriators, which go back to justify that to the people who put them in office. So interesting points there. And then the one piece that I'll say that will always be true and that we just have to learn how to manage is that you have to remember that Congress lives in a budgetary environment while people like myself and Brandon live in an economic environment. And if I decide I'm going to build you a 20-story building for, Platinum Technologies headquarters, look at the business case, see how much it's going to cost, and I sign. But in Congress, if I'm going to build that same building, I'll sign, but every year you got to come back and ask for another floor. Right? I'm only giving you enough money to get you started. And every year you have to justify why this building should be, still, 100 stories tall. You're like, you know what, I think 50 is a number. And then you're trying to figure out as an industry person, well, how do I make a 50-story building when it used to be 100 stories? So just remember that no matter what, that conflict is going to exist, but understanding that is how you start to be able to move laterally and navigate throughout that situation. Over to you.
Sure. I think on the entrepreneurial side, I mean, the company I'm in is a small U.S. subsidiary of an already small global financial technology company, trying to do business both in central banks on one part of the company and then with the federal government to target, bad guys better with the DoD. And what this creates is this gap in simple communications with especially people who should be generating better requirements on the government side, to Alex's point. Like, they're undefined requirements. It's just this contract vehicle that exists, and then you're fighting to get your company on the list of things that could then maybe provide you a solution. So the first thing that I'd say in this thing is we're still a bunch of solutions looking for problems most of the time, right? And the problems are represented by these pots of money called contract vehicles. And you're trying to get on there and then say, my solution's applicable to this, as opposed to the other way around. Like, there's not like a very good, we need to accomplish X measured by Y by doing Z. And so if the government could say we need to accomplish X measured by Y, it's industry who does Z and tries to bring that to bear, right? But there isn't that calculus and that communications paradigm doesn't exist. The other thing I would say with AI and machine learning is there's a leadership gap of understanding of it. You'll hear this all the time. I think at lunch we were joking about this. Like, you'll hear AI or machine learning or some of these technologies referred to as nouns. Like, oh, well, we have this problem, AI will do it. And you're like, no, that's not how that works. And by the way, if you did use it that way, it's wrong. What do you mean it's wrong? AI did it. It's like, yes, it could still be wildly wrong. And the only thing worse than being wrong is being confidently wrong, right? And AI can give you that. AI can give you a high degree of confidence in an absolutely terrible assessment. So the hard part is communicating, for instance, simple things that may make sense to a business school or young cadets that are more technology enabled than your superiors are going to be, right? But it comes down to this ability to navigate the acquisitions of something that says, okay, so let me get this straight. I bought software from you, but you're also selling me data scientists. Why? Like, why do you have the software if the data scientists could do it, or why don't I just get data scientists? Like, right, because there's this thing called training the model, right? And then that has to happen, and then the software can do the thing, so there's just this big gap of understanding of, like, what is AI and machine learning? Like, what is it that the government's acquiring there? And then to the rest of this conversation's point, like, is it a model that we want to let out of house? Can it be commercial? What libraries and packages? Is it open source or is it closed source? Most people don't know how to ask this. And you have practical problems that maybe you guys haven't dealt with. You're not allowed to use this library from this Python package or this R package because of where it was built and who built it, and it hasn't been scanned. Or you're 14 iterations behind, you're still using Python 2.4, on these computers. So there's a lot of practical problems that I think address the question of, like, what are those gaps and seams that need to be closed off a bit better in like the entrepreneurial to leadership, military leadership discussion. You guys, being the younger generation, are going to be the ones that, like, literally develop the language, and hopefully some, like, smart contract technology would be super cool to kind of smooth that out, right? And hopefully we can get there.
Do we have any audience questions, or Alex, do you have anything else that you wanted to jump in on? There, we do have some audience questions. We've got a few moments.
Attempts to conceal and sort of hold open source information or information from becoming open source to be handled by large data programs and AIs?
Repeat it again and yell at me.
Well, how does U.S. Capabilities in conducting large-scale data analytics handle Chinese counterintelligence and the Great Firewall and its attempts to keep information from becoming open source to become analyzed and processed?
Good question. So I won't speak, I understand the question now, specific to China, but I think the broader question is how do we use AI to sift through information on adversaries? China happens to be the biggest focus from the perspective of our national defense strategy. So I get that. There's a couple things here. You know, Anuj, you talked about the hours of data. This work that you're asking about, again, has been done primarily by individuals. And just being able to either process faster, get consistent signatures, things that help us do deeper analysis and ask those second and third order questions, I think inform the governance and the policy for what approaches we would either want to take from a diplomatic standpoint, sanctions, conversations with our counterparts overseas, et cetera. And some of this may even be down to the point of it might have to do with trade, right? Because a lot of what we've seen from, let's call it economic espionage when it comes to China, has advanced their economy. And that's what's been able to generate the revenue in the terms of GDP for their nation, for them to build up other capabilities from the perspective of they have a different, economic system than we do, which is adverse to ours. So I would just say that I would look at it from the perspective of being able to process, understand and interpret data so that individuals can make better decisions and inform the policy making that's associated with that.
Just speak up from right there, Gavin.
Sounds good. So, gentlemen, in reading the National Defense Industrialization Strategy, you see there's a huge focus on workforce. You brought up something, you need to be 10% smarter than the equipment you use. Okay, that's great. We need a lot of smart people, but there's a limit of how many smart people there actually are. Especially smart people who can handle and use and even develop increasingly complex technologies. Well, how's the division of labor going to work between the industrialized sector and the military? Is that going to require some sort of integration of shared workforce personnel? Is that going to require a policy to actually be written in sort of like a Last Supper style dinner between members of the Pentagon and members of Lockheed Martin, Boeing? You see what I'm saying? How is that problem being recognized by the military, by the private sectors, and how do they plan to approach it?
I kind of have a sarcastic but true answer, I think, which is, especially to the latter part of your question. I mean, that is K Street in Washington D.C., right? That lobbying that occurs is all happening right there between the branches of government, especially legislative and executive, and especially the larger defense contracting companies, right? So to that end, yes, it is integrated. It's when you're in the scene, let's call it, it's not really hidden. It's not cloak and dagger. There's everybody always worries about the senator in the smoky room with the payoff, and it's no, it's just in the hotel lobby right there, and I'm being facetious, but yes, that integration does happen, and oftentimes, like I said, even with serious answer though, even with requirements management, it's hard for us to build the technology you need if the requirements are poorly defined, and often in national security, you can't define the requirement too specifically and then produce it to everybody because you're also putting your own neck out. That's you showing the enemy where your vulnerability is, right? So everything's kind of shrouded. And so it makes it hard to get in there and compete sometimes. But the bottom line is, yeah, those things are there. As far as like how does the shared manpower and all that works, I think you guys would be surprised to the extent, especially at higher echelons of the government and military apparatus, how much of the staff is already represented by industry. You know, I think it would, you don't have to have a good or bad opinion of it, but I think it would be alarming, and just like most people don't. They assume that that building with 5,000 DoD members in it are all military members, and it's most likely that half, if not more, are contractors from these industries. And I would say with research and development, and especially in hardware going all the way back, I wouldn't say that's new. You know, and there's a rich history of this also. Part of this that we haven't really discussed much is what happens at the labs, right? So, you know, going all the way back to Los Alamos and all the rest, you know, where does a lot of that happen, and how do they push a simplified prototype capability out to the rest of the force? And it gets increasingly, you know, as it gets better designed, whatever the technology is, it gets increasingly easier to use, hopefully, until it finally reaches that end user, and their requirements have been put like back into the product, right? So through different iterations. So I think it happens. I would agree with you, though, that it seems haphazard, and it seems as though it doesn't really happen in a straightforward manner, and I don't think anybody in this business would disagree with that. I mean, maybe you guys think it's a streamlined process, but
No.
yeah.
Definitely not streamlined. You know, Mr. Riley, you educated me on something today when you were talking about workforce, right, where there are less people entering the workforce for various different reasons. So to answer your question, you know, concretely, in terms of the routine items related to workflow or information gathering, I think that's actually additive to the workforce because there are less people able to do the job. So if you can focus individuals on higher quality tasks instead of using 20, 30% of your work week on information gathering or doing things that are routinely related, I think there's an actual thing that helps there. There's going to be a challenge with some of the higher level things that AI is going to purportedly do for us, right? They're going to be human for us. But at the same time, I think there is a lot more opportunity now to be gained from efficiencies that'll help the economy and people in their jobs than hurt.
Ma'am, you'll have the final question back there. Time for our last question.
I have two questions. One is I heard a situation where it's amazing 1 hour to go from California to New York, but there's still a situation where in that 1 hour, that amazingly close space, a situation can change and different actions may be called for. So my question is, how would you deal with that kind of situation and even hypothesize that's going to happen? That's number one. And the second one is I heard what's needed in our information technology is no trust systems. And what's being taught in business schools about organizations is creating trust through certifications.
Yeah, so let's see. That first one, fortunately, I don't have to be in that decision-making process, but it's an important one because the things that I want to be part of is being able to provide the best information as quickly as I can. And if there's a technology that's associated with that, that we can do that, we want that in the hands of our decision makers. Because, you know, I mean, it took me 2.5 hours on the train just to get from DC, and that would have been like 1.5 hours too late, right? So very, very complex in terms of, I would think, say, military planning and strategy, which, you know, I'm not part of those conversations, but there are, each service based on what their responsibilities are, they are war gaming and planning and thinking about second, third, fourth order effects, things that we're not even thinking about, right? So the things I'm talking about is publicly available information. But you think about the things that are not publicly available and just thinking about what should we be doing in terms of responsiveness. The piece that I can say is I know that there are people who are responsible for studying that problem, and they've got some of the hardest jobs, because if any of those situations become reality, not even for America, but for our allies, that brings us into the fight. So I'll pause there and let somebody answer that second question.
So your second question about the zero trust, and where we brought that up is the way our information technology is set up is we have kind of like this perimeter security. And once you're in, now you can do whatever. So, and I think when we talk about the zero trust architecture and multi-level security architecture is where you're constantly questioning, does this person that is inside this fence need access to this specific system? Does this person have to check, have the required accesses to actually access it? So that's kind of where we're talking about, because the current cybersecurity infrastructure is very vulnerable to various types of attacks where you are constantly being, attacked with multiple different, the DDoS attacks that I think we talk about, which can overwhelm your system, and then eventually, then your resources are slowing down. So, and I think that's kind of where that, from the information technology standpoint, we're talking about is how do we efficiently incorporate a security mechanism that protects our various systems in different levels, but also not slowing down the system now that your resources are fully, your computer system is completely bogged down. You have the 100% secure system, but it takes you 1 hour to send an email. So, and that's kind of where we're thinking about when it comes to like that zero trust architecture. Hopefully that answers your question, ma'am.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you all so much. I know all of these are very good questions. I know I saw many more hands up there. Our panel will stay for a while. If you have any questions for Alex in Poland, just send it to me via email or send it to Adam via email, and we'll get it to him. So thank you, Alex, so much. I know it's way past, it's 9 o'clock over there, 9:30. So thank you, Brandon. Thank you, Anuj. Thank you, Jermon. Here's a small token.
Alex, yours is in the mail.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
And students, if you haven't had your attendance recorded, just make sure you get your attendance recorded. There are some snacks for you, all of you, to enjoy outside while you're talking with our panel. And thank you so much for coming. This is so interesting. We could just listen to you for hours and hours and hours. We're outside. You have some snacks, so just socialize with our panel.
Before we release everybody, Renew, we're just going to give you and the panel a Pirate Battalion coin for your excellent partnership. Please join me in a round of applause for our team here.